Hey everyone, welcome to Nerds by Nature. My name is Seth, and I've got my co-hosts here, Josh.
Hey.
Braden.
Hello there.
And Brian.
Hello.
And today we're going to be talking about everything Apple. The good, the bad, even the ugly.
I feel like we should start by just noting who has what phone in this group. Since you can't see us, you're listening.
Just our daily drivers?
Yeah.
Daily
and honestly, I think that'll help us kind of establish where we're coming from when we're talking about Apple. So, yeah.
Well, I'm daily driving an S22 Ultra, so I'm a little biased here.
And I'm here with a Pixel 6a, also biased.
I'm here with an S22.
I'm here with an iPhone 6S that my parents got me, and I actually don't really like it, but I can't justify the money to replace it. So that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah,
Less biased.
A little less biased.
Yeah. So we will admit out of the gate that we are biased towards Android. But what we're going to try to do in this podcast is discuss Apple in a bit more of an unbiased way. Talking about everything good about Apple and also approaching the things that maybe aren't so good, including, the monopoly stuff that's been happening recently with the lawsuit. But then we'll also talk about a lot of the good stuff, like,
Some
just
products.
It's hardware, it's software, some of the innovation they do, like just all of that.
Yeah.
So we're going to try to just approach it from the standpoint of who Apple is instead of just our preferences.
So let's start at the beginning with what is Apple? Like, why is it still a thing to this day? It's been 20 years.
One of the biggest things is just the fact that they were the first people to create a smartphone, period. Before Apple, especially before Steve Jobs, if you heard the word phone, you didn't think computer. You thought of something that could call someone. And they kind of established that with their now dead CEO, Steve Jobs, in the late 2000s, early 2010s.
Yeah, they became a phenomenon, and I use that word so often, but it's true to this extent of the slate type phone that we have now of just hardly a screen.
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, smartphones did exist before the iPhone came out. I mean, we had the BlackBerry, we had Motorola's, we had all these different phones that were smart in some ways. They had capabilities. They could access the internet. They could do things more than calling and texting, but it wasn't intuitive, and it wasn't like as ubiquitous as smartphones are now with more than just calling and texting. So Apple honestly really set the stage for what the modern smartphone is.
Yeah, I know. I didn't hear about anything until I started seeing iPods on the bus in 6th grade, which would have been for me around like 2010.
I was so jealous.
And I was just thinking it's interesting how we went from calling them smartphones to just the word phone implying a smartphone.
Exactly. And so this has become synonymous as one device.
Yeah.
Which was absolutely incredible. It's a computer in our pocket, which was barely done. BlackBerry, as you mentioned, Seth, was probably the closest one at that point to having something anywhere remotely close.
Yeah.
But having just a screen is new.
Yeah.
That's what?
Super new.
Yeah.
4 buttons. You had a power button, 2 volume buttons, and a home button.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was from the BlackBerry that had a keyboard and a little trackball.
Mm-hmm.
And all this kind of sets the stage for Apple becoming just a very big player in the business. And they've remained a very big player in no small part, in my experience, due to their marketing team. And the fact that they just tend to really get very loyal users who don't seem to know why they're buying Apple, but always do. My parents have kind of become one of those. Not as much as some people, but they keep buying Apple products and I'm really not sure why. And I ask them why and they can't give me a reason.
Well, thinking about like the starting experience of you've hashed out your money for it, and you get that box, And that's something that I found so fascinating. My sister bought an iPhone, and just opening that box, that slide is so very intentional, and they spent so much money on how long it takes to just open that box.
Yeah.
And just on the slide and the feel of it, and then you open it up and there's just your phone. There's nothing else to see, it's just your phone.
Yep. And
that holds all of your attention and holds the suspense so that you enjoy that experience so much more.
I think this kind of what we've been discussing is kind of, as someone who's used an Apple phone but has also seen you guys use Android phones. It's a long story, but I had a phone that used Android OS for a little bit. I think my biggest gripe with Apple essentially comes down to not really their products, but the way they market them.
Yeah.
And some of the ways that they somewhat predatorily try to make money off of something that there's plenty of competition for out these days.
Yeah. So let's jump into the allocations. That's kind of hot news right now.
Oh yeah.
Is Apple's being sued by the Department of Justice for monopoly.
Yeah, and as of the courtroom hasn't happened yet. We're recording this mid-May 2024, but the suit is now out. Yeah, Department of Justice is after them. This is like the second big world power that has gone after them after the EU banned lightning cables, basically, within their borders. And the suit basically comes down to Apple. Some of the big things they're using to prove monopoly is that Apple deliberately doesn't encrypt text conversations if it's not between two iPhones.
If it's not through iMessage.
Yeah.
Yeah, through iMessage, which requires two iPhones.
Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of other things that this lawsuit goes through, but it all comes down to that whole idea of a monopoly, or maybe in terms of more like techie words, it's all about their ecosystem and the exclusivity of it. That every way you look at Apple's ecosystem, it is very exclusive, and it's hard, once you've gotten into the ecosystem, it's hard to get out of it without spending a fortune.
Yeah.
And you've already spent a fortune getting into it.
I mean, let's talk about prices. One of the things with Monopoly that they were talking about is pricing. Apple is able to charge a lot more than their competitors, and I think you guys have brought up some prices.
Yeah.
You want to read those off?
So the iPhone, the basic iPhone 15 currently starts at $800, and that goes up to I think $1,000 with the Pro.
Yep.
And what, $1,200 with the Pro Max?
$1,200 for the Pro Max.
And so Samsung's is pretty similar. They start at $800 with the Salad Galaxy S24, and with their Samsung Galaxy S24 Plus, it's $1,000. And then with their Ultra, it does actually go up a bit more. It goes to, let's see, $1,300. Actually starts at, $1,300. So the pricing is a bit more with that. There are some reasons, along with buying the Samsung name. There are some things that come along that justify that price tag. But then you have to consider the fact that Samsung also has their lineup of A-series phones, which start at $200. And they just incrementally increase, which means it's accessible to really anybody. Google, with their Pixel 8 right now, starts at $500 with their 8A, goes up to $700 with their 8, and then $1,000 with their 8 Pro. And they technically do have the Pixel Fold that's $1,800, but it's their first product within that realm of foldables. And I mean, Samsung's pricing with their folds isn't too different. So, so we have very different price differences with just phones, and it goes into everything with the laptops, with the Macs, with that stupid mouse, with everything else within the ecosystem, be it headphones, other headphones, charging cables. Everything is more expensive because it comes with that Apple price tag.
So at one point I bought an Apple charging cable that was actually like the company. I didn't think too much about it. It ended up being a good $20 more than a charging cable like a USB-C would be.
$20?
That's
It was like a
insane.
$35
Oh my
cable. It was
goodness.
ridiculous. My current phone doesn't have an aux out.
Mm-hmm.
So I bought a lightning to aux, and those are only sold by Apple, and that was, I think it was like $20 just for a lightning to aux converter. It's like a tiny wire. It's not even an inch long. So yeah, the Apple tax is very, very real.
Yeah. And I will admit something. I was talking about the Samsung prices, and when you look at the Samsung prices, they honestly are pretty similar across the board. The headphones, I think, are a bit cheaper, but then the laptops, a bit cheaper as well, though they're lower quality. They are good, but like they don't go quite as crazy as the laptops that Apple has. But you have similar prices within other companies. The difference is, and what a big part of this lawsuit is the exclusivity of those. So let's talk about that for a second. Think about the Apple Watch. The Apple Watch works incredibly if you have an iPhone. If you don't have an iPhone, it sucks.
It's a brick.
It's a brick. Now let's think about the Galaxy Watch. I have a Galaxy Watch. Braden has a Galaxy Watch. Guess what Braden has? A Galaxy phone. It works great. Guess what I have? A Pixel. It also works great because they have an app that perfectly integrates it with my phone. And so that goes across the board with every single Apple product. The headphones, the laptop, and all of the other things, they work great with Apple. Not so great with anything else.
And if you think about this, if you get into the ecosystem, there is hardly any way of you getting out.
Yeah.
Say I have my iPhone and I spent, let's keep it reasonable to $900 for my phone. I got a 15 plus because I needed the storage, whatever.
Yeah.
And then I need the headphones, right? Because it doesn't have a headphone jack. And so I'm going to get we're just going to get just the pros. Okay. That's another, what, $400? Give or take?
No, I think it's $250.
Okay. That's still reasonable.
I can fact check that, but I'm pretty sure it's $250.
Headphones, but yeah.
And to get all the fancy features in that, okay, well, I decide that I don't like, the operating system. I just spent so much money on this, and it's hard for me to leave. Because because I have my pictures on there. I have my credit card is already on Apple. I have all of this stuff that's locking me into this ecosystem. I just spent so much money and I'd have to replace it all. Because if I just want to switch my phone, I just don't like the operating system on the phone. And I just want to go to Samsung, go to Google, wherever. I have $250 that are now a brick. And so that's a big concern of this, of why this is a call out of monopoly, is because it's turning good merchandise into slag practically.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, like a few months ago, I wanted to get a ringtone onto my phone, a specific ringtone, and I couldn't do it. I hit a point where I was like, getting the file over was such a pain from a Windows computer, which I hate the Apple OS for computers. I'm okay with it for phones, but I hate it for computers, so I don't buy a Mac personally. Yeah, I couldn't do it. I just gave up. I'm like, this isn't worth it.
Yeah, there's so many different ways that they walled off this garden. And I think that imagery of having of the closed ecosystem being a walled garden is very good to think about.
Works really well.
Because you have your walls you have the messaging system, you have your operating system, you have the extra devices, you have all these different sides of the wall. But inside the garden, it's amazing. Yeah. Like going into, the Vision Pro, the stuff with the Vision Pro, I'll admit
that thing is amazing.
It is fantastic. The stuff that it can do compared to a lot of the other like VR headsets, or I guess they don't call it a VR headset. It's a spatial computing device. Anyway,
got to do it the Apple way,
of course. The one feature that I was like, oh man, it has got to be nice to be an Apple user, is you just pull up your Mac, you just open it up with your headset on, and you look at that even with the blink screen, and it's off. And it'll be like, hey, you want to connect to your Mac? And you just push a button, and you're right into your computer.
Yeah.
Yeah, and by contrast, if I wanted to connect like an Oculus Quest 2 to my Windows computer, you have to go through a few more intermediate steps. You have to download an app on your Windows computer, and then you have to either plug in your headset to the computer or get like a super good Wi-Fi router and put it right next to your computer, something like that. It's just a little bit more of a hassle than Apple's setup.
Yeah, and that's for something that is that's completely off to the side. It's not even by the Windows or anything like that.
And there are some limited added security features to the walled garden. It is a wall, right? And that's kind of where Apple has decided to mount their defense. Like, if you are iMessaging, there's better encryption. There are a few things in general that Apple's a little better with security. Problem comes with the fact that we don't want Apple to have a monopoly. We don't want anyone to have a monopoly. And two, for that to happen, there has to be people with other phones, and you have to message people with other phones. I have to message you guys all day, every day.
Yep.
So,
I mean, yeah, no, if you have a friend who has an iPhone, or if you have an iPhone, you know that you or they have blue bubbles. But if anybody else has an Android, it's a green bubble. And it apparently breaks their chats. And it's so ugly in all these different things. It's also a clout thing, I've decided.
And
I've decided. No, it's just very clear.
They do a weird job of making the blue bubbles feel different.
Really premium,
a little bit,
almost.
yeah. But it is definitely a status thing, too.
And that's the thing, is that all of that is directly intentional.
Yep.
It is not hard. There have been people that have tried to make this transition a little bit better. I want to say it was called Pager or something like that. But it was an app that you would connect to your Apple ID, and you'd be able to access all of your messages that way, so that you would still register as being on an iPhone. Apple shot that out of the sky with a ground to air. I mean, it was crazy how quick that was gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's another sunk cost thing, is your Apple ID. Any app you buy isn't going to translate to any other phone. Like, I haven't bought any of the fancy AirPods or anything, just because, again, I have this phone out of just financial necessity. But I have bought a few apps, so I would probably lose around like $50 if I switched.
Which, to be fair, that isn't too different with something like Google Play.
Yeah, that's true.
But you are locked into a specific operating system.
Yep.
Yes, you'd still have to be on Android, but you'd be locked into that specific type of phone. If there was something you didn't like, then you'd be locked into that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you bought if you bought some, let's say, game that costs like $10 on your $1,000 Samsung Galaxy, but you decide, oh, it broke and I don't have the money to buy it. Oh, I want a $200 phone. Buy it, and you can download that same app. It's going to work.
And I mean, the important point here is that we want interconnectability. It's not that we necessarily think Samsung should be the new Apple. It's that we don't think there should be a new Apple.
Yeah,
we need competition in the marketplace and innovation.
So let's tune down the fire a little bit.
Sorry about that.
And so let's look at what innovations Apple has done.
Yeah.
What have they been able to pushing the envelope? Because that's what they were doing. When they started out, they were pushing the envelope on everything. So what are some things that they are doing that are like top notch, that people are actually intrigued?
We've already talked about the Apple Vision Pro and the ability to like project VR images into a real life camera feed that you're getting, which is pretty cool.
It's not quite as much of an innovation, but a lot of their business-oriented things are also really good. You think of their extremely expensive, like as much as a car computers that businesses use, those are great. They come at a price, but they're great for what they do. And so there are a lot of solutions that they bring to the table that maybe other companies don't.
Their products, like I will say, Apple OS I have found is easier for people who aren't as technologically inclined to get started on. Obviously, either one is just a little learning curve at first. But Apple OS is just a little simpler. It comes at the cost of a few features, like I can't do split screen and such, but
it's intuitive. It's simple. You turn on your phone, you set it up, and there you go. You don't really have to change anything. So that is honestly something that I've always respected about Apple. Like I said, I'm an Android user. I love Android. But for someone who doesn't really care about a lot of customizability and really just wants the phone for what a phone does, iOS is a great solution. It works and it does nothing more. It works great.
I think if Apple were to start moving away from some of the practices of walling off their garden and just left it a garden instead of a walled garden, I think they might. They're still a viable option, right?
Yeah.
I think another thing that really makes them so intriguing to other people is, like you said, Seth, that everything works.
Yeah.
Everything, you can rely on your iPhone a little bit more than you can a Samsung or an Android, period. And that's not because of basic OS, which it can be. But I think it's mainly just because of you're dealing with so many different manufacturers.
Yeah.
And Apple's jumped on that and they've started producing their own chips. They've started everything is under their direct control now, so that they don't have to worry about getting that CPU to integrate properly, so they don't get random errors if some random thing happens. You can get that on Androids. I've seen it. I have no idea what just happened, but it just crashed.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea what to do. Apple's seem to be a lot more reliable in that aspect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Apple is, like you said, incredibly reliable. It's optimized. Everything that they do seamlessly.
Yeah. And there can still be like integration in between Macs and such that's super smooth. I just want to see less deliberately roughing out the process between iOS and Windows to the point where I can't get a ringtone on my phone.
Yeah. I think something that frustrates me with that is when they try to present it as a brand new innovation.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
As something like, when they first did like face recognition, I laughed so hard when they tried to produce it as like the brand new thing, because Androids had that for, I think, 3 years prior. Same thing with like fingerprint sensor stuff like that was it was brand new.
Yeah. Something I think is even funnier is widgets. How old are widgets? I think as old as Android. How old are iPhone widgets? Like a year old, and people
my phone
flipped. They were like, "Oh my goodness, I can put a calendar on my home screen." I have had a calendar on my home screen for years. I've had a little clock on my home screen. I've had my schedule. I have a little Duolingo widget that just tells me that I need to do Duolingo or else I will die.
Assassinated.
Like, it's just so funny sometimes how they present these things. Now, of course, there are some times where these are actually innovations. How they decided to deal with a screen that goes basically that basically covers the entire front of the screen with almost no bezel. The way that they decided to just curve the OLED underneath, it's really cool. They patented it, which I guess is fair, but also how dare you? I want those tiny bezels. But it honestly is really cool. It's small innovations like that Apple does that is honestly really impressive.
Yeah, and that includes up to the point of the always on display. That's another thing that Samsung. I keep saying Samsung because I'm a Samsung user. I'm so sorry. That Android has used for quite a while was the always on display, and then when the iPhone 15 came out and they dropped this new OS update, and this was the brand new thing that you could turn your phone sideways while it was charging, and it could become a clock.
Oh my goodness.
I remember seeing the trailer and I just laughed.
Yeah.
Because I could have done that 4 years ago, maybe even 5, just by it's just there. It's something that they don't even acknowledge. Well, they do that intentionally, that they don't acknowledge that competitors even exist. But they try to present it as something new. Oh, even the USB-C. USB-C, they claimed for the intention of saving more space. And so that you could get better charging.
Funny thing is, I'm fairly certain USB-C is taller than Lightning.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely had nothing to do with the EU.
Definitely not.
No, because outside influence doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Nobody's influenced by external markets or even the government. Apple is not influenced by the government.
Okay, and before we move on from this, there is actually one innovation that I've been trying to think of. I will mention, we were sitting here for like 30 seconds and I was trying to think of it. You will not have heard that. But one thing that's actually like pretty cool that Apple has done is MagSafe. I think MagSafe is actually really cool. I would love MagSafe in my phone because I feel like that's one of the things that they brought over, wireless charging. And they did it the Apple way, but in such a way that it was actually kind of an innovation where it makes wireless charging so much more seamless. And it adds a lot of functionality to that, where you can just stick it onto a stand or stick on accessories to the back of your phone, which I personally wouldn't do. But I would love to just be able to stick it to a stand or just have it click onto a wireless charging pad. MagSafe, great.
Agreed.
Yeah, and I think this whole discussion kind of comes down to the point of, I think just as the public, we want business people to be a little more straight and a little more honest with us.
Yeah.
Show us what you have to offer, not some curated version of it.
Yeah, and I don't want to be locked into some settings because some developer in California said no.
Yeah.
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 Well, that about wraps it up. Now, I know at the beginning we did say we would be a bit less biased, and we got a bit heated. Sorry about that. But I do just want to end by just re-acknowledging the fact that Apple has done a lot of good. That they have a lot of good stuff that they brought to the table, and they have great products. And while we and the government itself doesn't really agree with a lot of their business practices, they are still a company that makes good products.
And you also, Apple users do not necessarily equal the company.
Yeah.
So
I know a lot of great people that use Apple. Some of them by choice, some of them because they have it. But so this episode was not to insult people who use Apple, because again, I can respect it. I understand why people like it. We just personally prefer Android.
It's to bring things to your awareness and for an awesome topic to talk about. And that's why we're here.
Maybe to vent a bit.
Just a bit.
Well, anyways, after that venting session, we'd just like to sign off, so we will see you next week.